My name is Zoe Dirse, and I started in the film industry as a camera assistant around 1975. What inspired me to be a cinematographer was probably when I was at U of T and I was studying psychology, and I had a professor who was doing experiments in nonverbal communication, and he was filming them, and he handed a camera to me. It was a Bolex, I remember. And I looked at him and I said, "Oh, I don't know how to use this." And he said, "You'll learn." So I went out and I filmed a lot of his experiments, pedestrian patterns, facial expressions, which, by the way, came in very useful when I started doing documentary. And then there were a few other influences along the way that kind of pushed me a little further into wanting to pursue it as a career. I actually decided I was very fascinated by film and French New Wave cinema at the time, and thought I wanted to. I was always interested in photography. I had a wonderful little Rolly camera and art in general, and I thought the most interesting part of the cinema process was cinematography, because it had the creative element that was a big part of it. And I had went to work on a film for the French NFB when it was here in Toronto. And there was a wonderful cameraman who was an artist, Claude Benoit. And he said, "Well, you'd make a good cinematographer." And then I was fortunate enough to get a letter of recommendation from a very good cameraman. And he was in the CSC at the time, and I got into the CSC training course. And that was really the most official training I've had. Other than that, it was all on set. The first film I worked on as a camera assistant was for a documentary for TV Ontario. And the cameraman hired me, and I said, "Why are you hiring me? I don't really..." He knew I had done the camera assistance course for the CSC, so he knew how to load magazines, and I knew the basics, and I asked him why, and he said, "Well, because of your other background. Because before that I studied psychology, and I was working with underprivileged kids in the city and as a counselor, and this film was that subject matter. So I realized you can bring a lot to the table as a cinematographer, not just that one craft part, but other things in your life." And then I pursued drama and worked on quite a few Canadian dramas in Ontario, and then was fortunate enough to get a job at the National Film Board in the camera department. So that lasted for 17 years, and then when they started to shut things down, I moved back to Ontario and Toronto, and was able to get work on reality TV, other documentaries. It was quite robust for a while there. And then I became a professor of film and cinematography at Sheridan College for 10 years. I think gender has a big role in terms of the type of sensibilities that I would bring to my craft as a cinematographer. Your cultural background may have a lot to do with it as well, in terms of where you come from, what your influences are from your family, and also from your interests in the arts play a large role. Now, of all people, you should be asking me that question. I think my role on a film set is to really interpret the visual story to the script, to the director, as best as I can, and bring my aesthetics to the storytelling process. I think I had to laugh, actually, because I remember when I was taking the training course for the Canadian Society of Cinematographers, there were 12 students altogether. It was quite competitive. And we were three women. 2 women quit after a week, and I stayed. And some of the silly comments from the guys was, you can't do this. And I would say, why? Because you're a girl and you don't know how to do this. I was 2 feet taller than most of them and stronger. And I drove a tractor when I was 12 years old. And I thought, I could do this. This is ridiculous. What are they talking about? But they didn't know me. And it was just the perception, I think, that women are not capable of this kind of job. In all the years that I've worked, and I have to be quite honest and say that when I started, I thought I was really surprised that there were so few. You and Susan Tro at the National Film Board, and I think there was a woman at the CBC, and I thought those are crazy low statistics, and that was in late 70s, and I thought, oh well, by the time I'm 50, there should be 50% women shooting. Well, as we very well know, that's not necessarily the case at all. I mean, the percentages are slightly higher, but if you do, which I've done research with all film societies, a lot of film societies in the Western world, the statistics are fairly low. But I think that the obstacles for women are that there are not that many role models. Women need to look up to other women. I think women are searching that out more. I personally was in love with French New Wave cinema, and I discovered Nurita Viv was a French-Israeli cinematographer for Claire Denis and many of the women in France at the time. And also the fact that industry is not very conducive to women having a family. The glass ceiling is very high. I was told by, when I was doing feature films in Toronto in the 1980s, that it would take me 10 years to get my eye behind the eyepiece. And I thought, it's a little too long. And so I set my goals at 30 that I should be shooting. And I think those are all things that that sometimes just hold women back and think there's got to be an easier way to make a living. So it's unfortunate, but it's still largely the case today. In terms of character traits for cinematography, I think creativity, skill, good work ethic, loyalty are all very important in terms of our craft. In my own personal journey in cinematography, I've dabbled in everything from documentary to drama to TV series to reality. And my passion was always, in the end, documentary, which I decided that I would focus on that. And there were tons of aha moments working on those documentaries because they took me all around the world. Even recently, climbing a volcano in the Congo where we were looking for 40 gorillas in the wild, and running into them was really exciting. And or going through the jungles of Peru and meeting anteaters, and we had a conversation with an anteater. The very first documentary I did for the National Film Board was called Abortion Stories North and South, with Gail Singer as a director. I was a camera assistant. Susan Tro was the director of photography, and Diane Carrière was a sound recordist. We were an all-woman crew back in the early 80s, which was very unusual. And we had some time off, and we went to Machu Picchu. And the director said, well, no, we don't need to bring a camera. We don't need to bring a camera. And I thought, why? You never know. And so I smuggled the camera under my coat, and somehow we got away with the tripod and paid the guard off for $20. I mean, it's impossible these days to do that, to get that kind of access. And it's the opening shot of the film. It's quite beautiful. So there were the Golden Temple, the triangle in northern Thailand, meeting all those indigenous tribes. Oh, it was just, there's just been so many. Dancing with 2 black women in a shanty town outside of Nairobi in Kenya to an old jukebox and drinking a beer. There are just many, many, many experiences like that. And also the other thing that aha moments were when you actually did do a documentary and it did provoke change. It did provoke either laws changed or people had a stronger sensibility about an issue that they never even thought about before, or developed another perspective. That was, I think, one of the strengths of the National Film Board in working on those films, and then later on working with a lot of female directors in Toronto who had those sensibilities as well. There were many, many highlights in my career, and one of them was actually filming a child being born, meeting gorillas in the wild. Some of the other highlights was having the opportunity to film some extraordinary personalities and women in the world. Writers such as Margaret Laurence, politicians like Maud Barlow, scientists like Ursula Franklin, French singers like Pauline Julien, and who championed the French culture in Quebec. Incredible intellectual French thinkers in Quebec like Luc Bersianic, the playwright and poet Jovette Marceau, and also working with Diane Brand, a current poet from living here in Toronto, and working with her on some documentaries as well. I was quite naive in terms of what the industry was really all about. I really felt like a boys' club, and to fit into that boys' club, I didn't have a huge problem with that, having grown up with a brother and a father and working on and being on a working farm with lots of male workers. But it's different when it's something that you're pursuing and you're just going, oh boy, I've got to really pay attention to this. And also, I think I wish someone would have told me how hard it's going to be, how tough it is really going to be. I realized that fairly soon, but because I had such a passion for the craft that I just stuck with it and went, you can't put me down. I also had a very strong role model in a mother who came from a matriarchal culture in Eastern Europe, Latvia, where it was possible to be anything you wanted to be. There were no obstacles, whether it was in playing on the baseball team in public school. When it was a Catholic school, they wouldn't let us play because we were girls. They said, what are you talking about? You need players. They're good. Sports, I think sports is also a really important aspect. I think sports is a good element to have in your skill set in terms of cinematography, because it keeps you fit. You learn the whole concept of competition, good sportsmanship, and teamwork. I think teamwork is something I didn't mention earlier in anything, but teamwork is very important. Yeah. And looking out for each other, especially in your department. I think the industry has changed dramatically since I started. One being the size of the cameras and switching from film to digital, for the good and the bad. So it was quite a bit of an adjustment to switch from film to digital, but digital does have its advantages in a lot of situations, and the cameras certainly are much smaller and lighter and easier to handle. One of the other big changes since I started was that there has become a consciousness about having more women in the industry, especially in the field of cinematography. So there is a more conscientious effort to train women. It was, I think, the early 90s when Susan Tro and I were in the camera department at the National Film Board, and we felt there was a real lack of female cinematographers, especially across Canada. So we convinced the studio heads in Studio D, the women's studio, to run a workshop for 2 weeks and said, we'll train them. And I'll just tell you a funny story. And these are women from all across Canada, and they had to apply, and two of them, Naomi Wise and Kim Durko, and several other women that are shooting quite successfully today. And we were all in the film studio at the National Film Board, which was state-of-the-art, beautiful studio, just like an old Hollywood studio, like MGM, or it was actually designed on that level. And so we had all the cameras and dollies in there, and had some friends come over from Eastern Europe, and they were all men shooting a documentary, and they came in and they saw all these women working with the cameras. The director looked at me with complete shock on his face and said, "Are there only camera women in Canada?" And I said, "Yeah, we wish. The changes I'd like to see is that 50% female filmmakers, in the same way that Sweden made that a conscientious effort to have 50% women directors and use 50% of their funding for films go to female directors. And I think there should be an effort from film societies and organizations to really push producers to include women on their sets, especially in the roles of cinematography and the camera department. In terms of what I'd like to do for the future is some small films, or smallish, maybe not so small, that have meaning to me, that I could sort of throw my skill sets into. And also mentoring young women. No one can take away all those years of experience, and what better way to do it than to share it with women, and especially on a set where you can help them, guide them to finding the right frame, setting things up. At this point in my career, it'd probably be a director. Working with someone like Sven Nykvist, who was Ingmar Bergman's DOP, would have been quite fascinating. In fact, I met him. I think some of the French directors, like Denis Villeneuve, I find is very interesting. Yes, in terms of, I think for any woman who wants to get into cinematography and film in general, that the operative word is passion. Just yesterday, in fact, I was speaking to a young woman from an immigrant family studying at York University in production, and she said, "Well, I think what I feel most about this industry is passion." And it's true. I think if you want to stay in it, you want to do cinematography or be a sound recordist or director, you have to approach it with a lot of passion. And that will include a lot of sacrifice in terms of your own personal life and maybe some of your ambitions or expectations, but in the end, it's very rewarding. The education that you bring to the table in terms of the craft cannot just come from one source. It has to come from your life in general and your self-education. And you're becoming aware of what's out there and what's interesting and what's good and what's not so good, and being able to become a critic and look at your own work with a critical eye is also very important. I'm hoping that these short interviews with other female DOPs will inspire young women to pick up the camera and the craft and carry on.